Why do we celebrate the anniversary of an assassination? 15 years ago, in the middle of a plague that nearly destroyed Dunwall, a paid killer assaulted the palace where I was born and stabbed my mother in the heart.
What makes a story good? Or for that matter, what makes it forgettable? I recently picked up Dishonored 2 again. When it first came out in 2016, I played through it, but didn't really think much about anything I saw or did in the game. I played as Corvo Attano, the protagonist from the first game, who was one of two choices to play as in this one. The other being his now all-grown-up daughter, Empress Emily Kaldwin. I recently got an urge to start playing it again and decided to play as the other option, or what I learned later on is the only option that should ever have been available in this game. I started asking my friends about it so I could have people to talk about the game with this many years after the release. I got some information from them that really got my brain going into overdrive. It seemed like most of the people I asked about it didn't really remember much about the story, or they confused it with the first one. It sort of reminded me of my own initial memories. Kind of lackluster, feeling less coherent than the first game. I noticed one thing seemed to be true across the board. Those of us who had really fond experiences of it over the first game played as Emily instead of her father. There were a few outliers, and obviously a sample size of my followers on Instagram, Snapchat, or whatever social media site they decided to respond on was not a statistically significant amount of people. Statistically significant. Statistically significant. God, that's harder to say out loud. But they are enough to see a pattern that I also saw repeated in other places online. The game should never have made Corvo a playable character. His inclusion watered down the story, and people's attachment to an existing character ran the risk of them never even seeing the story as it was clearly meant to be told if they decided not to play through it again. Trying to write one game that would work with either main defanged the most basic part of the story. What is this story about? If you've played the first Dishonored, you know that the main character was Corvo Attano. Or, I guess even if you didn't play it, I did say his name earlier. He was the royal protector and lover to Empress Jessamine Kaldwin. They have a daughter together named Emily. Jessamine is assassinated, Emily is kidnapped, a coup has shifted power in the Empire, and Corvo is blamed for all of it. The rest of the game is Corvo taking out the conspirators behind the coup and his daughter's imprisonment, trying to rescue his daughter with the help of powers given to him by the Outsider. The Outsider is a lot to get into. I would need a whole separate video to talk about that guy. He's the magic guy and basically a god. That's all you really need to know. The ability to choose your playstyle is a big part of these games, for better or worse. It's almost comically easy to beat the game in a couple hours if you go the violent, non-stealthy way of playing. So it wasn't a surprise when Dishonored 2 started with what should be a world-changing choice. Who gets to experience this story? Is it Corvo? He was the main character from the first game and he was pretty cool to play as. Is it Emily? We don't really know much about her except that she's the Empress now and things seem to be going poorly for her and her empire. If you choose Corvo, the narrative drive of the story is, well, that a bunch of people have been assassinated, Emily is imprisoned in Magic Stone, a coup has shifted power in the Empire, and Corvo is blamed for most of it. The rest of the game is Corvo taking out the conspirators behind the coup and his daughter's imprisonment, trying to rescue his daughter with the help of powers given by the Outsider? Not exactly winning any awards for a fresh new story there, are they? Unless, of course, you play as Emily. She seems almost bored by her position as Empress of the Isles, constantly sneaking away for holidays or to roam the city, not really grasping the ways her role as Empress affected other people. She seems selfish and pretty immature still. She's well capable of defending herself as her father lived in a constant state of paranoia that their enemies would come for her the same way they did for her mother. Her father has fought her battles for most of her life. A mysterious stranger claiming to be her aunt by way of a maid the old emperor seduced before Jessamine was even born arrives on the anniversary of the late empress's death day. She has magical powers and makes it clear she's here to take the throne from her undeserving niece. Corvo is magically trapped in stone, and suddenly Emily is without the strongest guiding presence in her life. She already lost her mother, and now she risks losing her father too. She escapes Dunwall Tower and flees the city on the Dreadful Whale, captained by Megan Foster, a friend to the inventor and natural philosopher Anton Sokolov. Megan grew up in Dunwall's flooded district, looking up at the city from the rat-filled streets. She's also Billy Lurk and associated with Dowd the assassin who killed Jessamine all those years ago. Emily won't find that out until much later, but it's kind of neat to know early on because of what Megan is doing in helping Emily. While sleeping on the ship, Emily dreams of the Outsider, who offers her his mark and the heart where Jessamine's spirit still resides.
Know you. Do you remember? It's been so long. You've been through so much. Even as an echo of myself. It's good to know you're there.
Mother? You're here, but you're not here. In my hand, but somewhere else.
Only the last of my essence. With you for a while.
The heart will speak to you of secrets when you point it at someone and functions gameplay-wise by helping you find certain hidden items. The mysterious crown killer, a wild figure that is the culprit behind the political assassinations leading up to the coup, has kidnapped Sokolov from the ship and taken him to the Addermeyer Institute in Karnaca. Megan and Sokolov had been investigating a potential coup and uncovered information about the ruler of Karnaca. They had been in Dunwall trying to inform Corvo and Emily of what was coming. Karnaca is the homeland of Emily's father. It has a slightly different feel than Dunwall. It's more brown and tan, where Dunwall is blue and gray. Duke Luca Abel of Karnaca is one of the new Empress Delilah's supporters and seems to have run Karnaca into the ground partially due to Emily's lack of attention to the people she ruled. Emily has to wade through the slums and get to Addermeyer, and there she either kills the famous Dr. Alexandra Hypatia, who is also the crown killer, or she gives her an antidote for the serum that turns her into the assassin monster. The doctor has information on the location of the kidnapped Anton Sokolov, and Emily heads back to the Dreadful Whale. If she saved Hypatia, the doctor will briefly join you on the boat to hide out and recover from her ordeal as the crown killer. The Aventa District is the next populated area Emily has to traverse to get to her next target, the inventor Kiran Jindosh. He is the brilliant creator of the clockwork soldiers that guard the wealthy of Karnaca. Their audio warnings are fun to just hide and listen to for a bit. There are a few messages that are placeholder recordings voiced by Jindosh that he never got around to reprogramming.
Triggering electrostatic discharge. Stand clear. Playback for combat protocols. Playback for unambiguous enemy.
The Clockwork Mansion he lives in is one of the two most unique and complicated level designs in the whole game. This level is infuriating to do without a guide, but it's also my favorite in the game. Or maybe it's better to do the level without a guide if you are a player with much more patience than I have. Instead of letting Jindosh know you're there by utilizing the clockwork mechanisms, you can actually slip behind the inner walls and climb around in the mechanisms that move them into new configurations. I don't know which method I prefer for clearing the mansion, because the other route involves Jindosh periodically speaking to you through a speaker system in the house.
At your last moment, the last vision is a work of the very pinnacle of invention.
He will even comment when you manage to get behind the walls because he doesn't have pressure sensors in the back passages.
I hope
It
the
seems
people
like a
will steal
reasonable
this
guess
while
that
leaving
somehow
I'm
you've
tired
got
of
to
waiting
be
for
on the inner
Jindosh.
walls of the house.
You can kill Jindosh or mentally incapacitate him with one of his own inventions. Rescue a weak and broken Anton Sokolov from a basement prison cell and head back to the ship again. Sokolov recovers on the Dreadful Whale and points you in the direction of the next target. Syria Gardens is where the Royal Conservatory and Brianna Ashworth are located. You can non-lethally take out Lady Ashworth, and it knocks out all the witches in the conservatory so you can loot in peace, which may be your best option considering the witches are really annoying. The non-lethal option severs Ashworth's connection to the Void and thus her connection to Delilah. After she is taken care of, you have to go find the long-since MIA Aramis Stilton. He, Ashworth, Hypatia, and the Duke of Karnaca were all involved with the return of Delilah after her apparent death a few years before. Which brings me to my biggest frustration that isn't related to the choice of protagonist. The Brigmore Witches was a DLC for the first Dishonored. In it, you play as Dowd the Assassin. You uncover a plot by the notorious witch Delilah Copperspoon to possess Emily and rule the Empire in her stead. You take out Delilah and have your final confrontation with Corvo, where he will spare you or kill you depending on chaos level. It's a little awkward in Dishonored 2 because it seems like they expected you to have played that DLC, so they don't really spend much time in-game actually showing you how badass or intimidating Delilah is. Expecting people to have played a major DLC isn't a bad thing in itself, but it does mess with your big baddie's intimidation factor when she just seems to be another person with void powers. They do long exposition dumps about the badass things she's done in the past, but that's kind of it. It has the effect of the overarching villain you're supposed to be moving against not even being much of a presence. The Duke of Karnaca, whose voice can be heard giving announcements throughout the city every time you're getting to a new objective, is more of an imposing and threatening presence because he is the one who's present and able to mess up your life directly. It shifts some when you're in the city segments. The Duke is who you hear from the loudspeakers and people talking about him. His guards are the ones you face. His name is the one people on the streets curse for his lavish lifestyle. Only in some of the levels you reach after those sections, places like Stilton's Manor or the Conservatory, you will deal with more Void and Delilah-related stuff. But never Delilah herself unless you do something like talk to the statue in Ashmore's office.
Little Black Sparrow, free from your cage at last.
It's done. Brianna Ashworth is no longer a witch.
You villain! You don't even know what you've done. A great bloom wilts and fades from the world.
Delilah, I will take apart everything you've built until I have what's mine.
Anyway, more on that later. Now we're in the Dust District. It's an area of the city that is almost constantly buffeted by dust storms as a result of the silver mines. Aramis Stilton's disappearance allowed the Duke to run his silver mines ragged and push the miners to the limits of their production. The unsafe workload and overmining causes new illnesses and increased death toll in the miners, along with the slow destruction of the Dust District itself. Stilton's Manor is sealed by one of Jindosh's clockwork locks. You can solve the riddle yourself or go get the solution from a few different methods. Once you are inside, it doesn't take long to find Stilton. The inside of his manor has fallen into disrepair, and the man himself sits alone in his study. One of the local gangs is in charge of delivering food to keep him alive in this prison. The outsider appears and monologues a bit before giving you the second neatest tool in the game. The tool that makes this level the other really cool one people tend to reference when talking about Dishonored 2. Emily uses this tool to jump between the present and the past, specifically the night of the ritual that brought Delilah back from death. You can use the tool as you wander around to see into the other timeline. It creates a neat new way to sneak up on enemies and also is the only way to bypass a lot of obstacles. You use it to find your way around and eventually walk in on the ceremony and watch Delilah's return. This level has another of the choices that actually feels important, like really important. You can leave Aramis Stilton alone in the past and the ritual plays out like normal. Or you can knock him out to stop him from attending the ritual that broke his mind, which brings him back to a more normal state in the present. Or you can kill him, which will change things in the future because people have tried buying and living in the Stilton Manor since his mysterious death, but the void tear caused by Delilah's return scares all potential tenants away. All the furniture has tags on them marking them for sale. It's a neat way to visually show the player consequences of their actions. Even that is nothing compared to the change if you stop him from attending the ritual. Stilton has remained a strong, fortifying presence in the district. The destruction and dust cluttering the streets is completely gone, and the locals seem genuinely happy to live there. They speak about how wonderful a person Stilton is and how much he cares for people. Aramis Stilton himself will join you on the Dreadful Whale and strategize with your crew about how to bring down the Duke. Nobody but Emily will remember the Dust District as it was, and she likes it that way. It's nice to actually have some type of real difference in the outcome of a situation based on the choices you made. I don't know if you've picked up on it yet, but I've kind of got a recurring thing going here about choices. On to the Royal Palace in Karnaca, where you can either kill the Duke or have him replaced by his body double. The body double is a nice guy who actually cares about the people and hates the ways the corrupt Duke rules Karnaca. So switching them out and letting the double rule will help people in the long run. This choice is important for Emily's future empire, though it doesn't really have any actual changes in gameplay after you make it. This whole time, she has been driven by the goal of regaining her throne and saving her father. Will she take revenge on the Duke for his treachery, or will she let him live and face imprisonment, ensuring the people of Karnaca will be in good hands so she can focus on Delilah? The people of Karnaca are suffering partly because of her. Emily's carelessness as a ruler allowed the Duke to do the things he did. She can right that wrong here. Emily is repeatedly chastised for her role in all this. Sokolov is no fawning subject to her. When Emily comments about Duke Abel sipping wine from silver cups while the people of the Dust District suffer, he calls her out and asks her what the cups in Dunwall Tower are made of. When she tries to complain to Megan about the backstabbers in court sucking up to her, Megan brings up how poor little Emily had to party and never go hungry or sleep in the cold, while people like Megan watched the lights in the tower from the roofs of the flooded district. Emily gains much-needed perspective during this quest to regain her throne. The statue holding Delilah's soul is in the Duke's vault. To bring it with you and return it to its owner means you need a vessel. The heart from the outsider speaks to you in your mother's voice for the last time. She says her goodbyes and fades away, replaced by the cruel voice of Delilah's spirit.
Was this the heart of my half-sister? Only her flesh remains.
All that is left for Emily is to go home and face her aunt. Or maybe aunt? They keep bringing up this uncertainty about whether or not Delilah tells the truth and never really go anywhere with it. The resolution of that mystery seems to just be Emily realizing that an accident of birth doesn't mean you deserve to rule over people. Which is fine, but it feels a bit anticlimactic. Megan Foster will take you back to Dunwall. She will stop Emily before she leaves the boat and confess everything to her. She is Billy Lurk, not just an assassin, but one of the people who stormed Dunwall Tower that fateful day long in the past and killed Jessamine, setting off the chain of events that led to this day. Emily can choose to be kind to Billy or not. I chose to be kind because I saw Emily as someone who understands that the mistakes of your past don't define how you choose to go forward. She could be seen as responsible for all the destruction caused by her poor behavior as a ruler, allowing such an easy infiltration of her haters at court. And this path represents the idea that though you recognize someone as a different person now, you don't owe them forgiveness for the things they have done in the past. Emily literally says that.
I can't ever forgive you for what you did. But suffering has a way of twisting people. You're a different woman today than you were then.
Yeah, we've all been hurt. But not all of us did what I did, or became what Delilah became. I know you'll never get over it, but neither will I.
I hope not. Goodbye, Billy. I'm taking the skiff, and I'll go alone from here.
Besides, Corvo already got revenge on Dowd. What would more hate and meanness do except to perpetuate this cycle? Billy trusts Emily to do the right thing and save Dunwall from Delilah. The new ruler has caused destruction and death to overrun the city. We see that even without the question of bloodlines and inherited rule, Delilah is a monster. Her vision for what the world should be is filled with blood and subjugated masses. The streets approaching the tower are filled with bodies. The Abbey of the Everyman tried to swarm the tower and oust the void-touched witch ruling over the city. They were slaughtered. Emily passes through and finds her way into her old home. When you finally reach Delilah at the top of the tower, you return her soul to her body, making her mortal again. Emily can neutralize her non-lethally by trapping her inside one of her own magical paintings, or just kill her. Once she's out of the way, Emily revives her father and takes her place again as the ruler of the Isles. After her adventure, she has a new outlook on her own responsibility. She's come to terms with her mother's death and even been able to say goodbye to Jessamine's spirit. She lost her throne and won it back rather than being placed there by a lucky chance of birth. She has finally come into her own as the Empress. Now, swap all of that with Corvo. The first things that jump out to me are the base similarities to the first game in structure. You still have all the fun levels and everything, but at its heart, it's the same Rescue the Princess story we played before. Mechanically, there are differences in powers that do give the player interesting options. In the New Game Plus mode, you can access both their skill trees, and that's even better, mixing and matching which powers you prefer. For me, it was preferring Blink over Far Reach as the big one. Using Blink with the rest being Emily's powers made the game super fun. As far as differences in the minute-to-minute details of the story, well, there really aren't any. There are occasional lines directed at Emily or Corvo, like Sokolov greeting Emily by name and making a vague reference to her as a ruler, but then he goes into the exact same monologues he does if you had played as Corvo. This holds true for every other interaction in the game. Some characters will even say something like, "I know who you are," and proceed with a vague monologue rather than naming the playable character or directly referencing them. The worst example of this is when you let Jessamine's spirit go from the heart. Her speech is so vague that she could be talking to either of them. It changes depending on your chaos level, but not really with who you play as. She will directly say a name in one part of it, but the rest is so vague it could be directed at anybody. This creates a very detached sort of narrative that doesn't really feel personal. I would expect Jessamine's spirit to have really specific things to say to her daughter about being a ruler, or just anything more specific than what we get. Or say something to Corvo about missing him and wanting to hold him again, bidding him farewell, and maybe a wish to see him again when he reaches the other side, or something. Anything. I get that they couldn't create two completely separate games to go with the choice of character, but maybe they should have just left Corvo out then so they could focus on fleshing out the existing story for Emily and give it more weight. Now on to the character development. Corvo begins the story as the hardened royal protector, paranoid about enemies harming his daughter, and he finishes the same way. More importantly, Emily will begin and end the story with no development if Corvo is the one to do the adventure. She will come out of her frozen state the same person she was before with everything done for her. Maybe a bit more paranoid, but still not understanding the weight of her own actions on the Empire. This is the most telling thing to me. If you play as Emily, she and her father have character development, rather than neither of them. I'm sorry, there's trucks driving by outside, so if you hear random noises, that's probably what it is. When Corvo is revived, he goes from being a sort of overprotective, paranoid father and royal protector to a proud man who knows his daughter can take care of herself. Not just take care of herself, but the whole empire too. She saved the empire. She did that. Go off, queen, or empress, I guess. She also saves him. She's no longer the little girl he wants to protect, but a powerful woman in her own right. It just boggles my mind that they even have Corvo as a playable choice when the narrative only becomes powerful with Emily as the protagonist. She allows both of them to grow. He causes them to stagnate in the exact same roles as before. I hope after all of that, you can at least see why I felt this was important for me to talk about. I sometimes drift away from the whole writing women thing, but every now and then something like this strikes me and won't leave me alone until I write about it. This was a story about Emily, and trying to give players a safe legacy option with Corvo just bungles the narrative completely. Thanks for taking this ride with me. Next video is probably going to be a return to my House of Night series because I've gotten a few requests to finish them off. Then after that, who knows? Leave your suggestions in the comments below. For all my new subscribers for my gaming content, I promise it will come back after an episode or two about book-related stuff. Though who knows? Maybe you'll enjoy watching me rag on really bad books. And on the subject of comments, if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear about it. Remember that this is all opinion here. You don't have to agree with me. I just appreciate you hearing me out. I have a Patreon if you'd like to support me and the show. You can find it over on patreon.com/writingwomen. My current patrons are on screen right now. Special thanks to my new $10 patron, Leland. You can support me over there for as little as $2 a month or as much as 10. No pressure though, unless you want to, of course. Thank you all so much for your support, even though I've been going through a lot and not really been able to upload as frequently as I would like. Depression is a real bear. I've been thinking of doing one of those sites for single donations if you want to support but can't commit to a subscription. Who knows, maybe I'll have it set up by the time I put this up. If I do, then a link will be in the description for that. Thank you all for watching. Bye bye.